as both a contemporary and something of an advisor to Benito Mussolini, Giovanni Gentile, and the fascist movement as a whole, Julius Evola remained many things. He was a traditionalist, a philosopher, and unfortunately a pagan too. But perhaps above all, the self-described superfascista stood, in my view, as the glaring example of critique and diversity of thought within the Italian fascist government. Within the government, he is one of the few remaining voices of criticism within fascism that I've found so far. Outside of the government, he was a pagan magician, a physical embodiment of the ideological you can't win them all. Now, for the compulsory YouTube disclaimer, I am not a fascist, and I don't think you should be a fascist. I just want to understand this movement, and I think that there's some good qualities in this objectively bad movement, and I'm here to talk about some of those today. In his book, Fascism Viewed from the Right, he offers several critiques and he still is espousing fascism, but he offers several critiques as well, several ways about how it could have been done better in his view. Things where he talks about some of the things where they kind of went wrong. They were too inclusive, believe it or not, within the fascist government. But the first one that I want to talk about here, and you'll see that I have plenty of tabs in here, is on page 36. I'm going to read excerpts and then I'm going to give a little bit of my opinion on some of these. Feel free to disagree or agree with me in the comments as always, but I'll just read directly from the text on page 36. Today, with the return of this obsession with rationalizing, there is a tendency, and again, this was written in 1974? No, 1972. So he wrote this well after World War II. So today, with the return of this obsession with rationalizing, there is a tendency to render service to an ideal that is not political, but social, and which belongs to physical comfort, and to marginalize and discredit everything that is comprised of existential tension, heroism, and the galvanizing force of a myth. But it has been correctly pointed out that a profound crisis is inevitable at the point when prosperity and comfort will finally become boring. The early signs of this crisis are already apparent. They consist of all those forms of blind, anarchic, and destructive revolts embraced by a youth that precisely in the most prosperous nations notice the absurdity and senselessness of an existence that is socialized, rationalized, materialistic, and dominated by the so-called consumer culture. In these revolts, this elementary impulse finds no object and, left to itself, becomes barbaric. Him and the fascists were already noticing this in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. This was already something that was being pointed out and warned against before World War II, before World War I even, I found. And he was certainly seeing it come more to fruition throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s too. You might say that people think that fascists were a bunch of racist or racialist idiots that just wanted to kill people because they weren't like them, that they were afraid of other peoples. No, objectively, no, I don't think. What he's saying here is that modernity is poison to the soul of man. And yes, of course, I'm including women here too, that modernity, the comforts, if you focus on just prosperity, if you focus on just feelings, if you get rid of things that make up the spirit of a person, they would say, the fascists would say, the spirit that is given to you from the state, because that is, as a side note here, that is one of the chief criticisms, maybe the biggest criticism and the biggest reason why I say you should not be a fascist is because they replace God with the state. You don't get your soul from the Lord. You get your soul and your spirit from your national identity that is defined by the state. That aside, though, or perhaps that is context, things that run counter to that national spirit, to that spirit of man, at wherever they say they get it from, things that run counter to that, the idea of liberalism, the idea of letting the individual do what the individual wants, turns to licentiousness, turns to focusing on just what feels good, focusing on the passions of man. So if you want to, it doesn't matter what you'd fall into, if it doesn't have to do with the good of the nation, with the good of your people. He's warning against that. I would argue that you should be more worried about what's right within God's will. But I see his point here in that removing an actual national identity, removing yourself from your people from your nation, not being worried about actual communal good, things that further your country, that further your people, that are actually good for you, even if it does mean adversity at some points. If you start turning away from that and running away from that, even, it leads to licentiousness, and as he puts it, I think aptly so, it leads to barbarism. Just a couple pages later, I tabbed these so it'd be easier, so I didn't have to look too much. There it is. As for the dangers presented by the fascist system from the point of view not of a shapeless liberal democracy, but rather of a true right, perhaps the most serious one is its so-called totalitarianism. The traditional state is organic, but not totalitarian. It is differentiated and articulated and admits zones of partial autonomy. It coordinates forces and causes them to participate in a superior unity while recognizing their liberty. Exactly because it is strong, it does not need to resort to mechanical centralizing, which is required only when it is necessary to rein in a shapeless and atomistic mass of individuals and wills, from which, however, disorder can never truly be eliminated, but only temporarily contained. We have come to know fascist regimes as radically violent regimes. And in practice, that's basically how they've all turned out to be. I've found, with the sole exception to be, for the most part, fascist Italy, oddly enough, but I'm still continuing my own research. It is true that in the actual doctrine of fascism from Giovanni Gentile and accredited to Benito Mussolini that there's nothing outside of the state, that everything comes from the state, that man makes up the state and the state defines the limits of man. And that nothing is permissible outside of that state, outside of that indomitable will of man as idealized by the state. All that to say, that kind of made perhaps rambling bit there to say, the idea that the fascist government will violently and ruthlessly control what you say, and it's at the whims of what the government says, there's absolutely an air of truth to that, even in the most charitable read of the doctrine of fascism. I'm not denying that at all. But even still, there is value in understanding that you should, not that you, I guess not that you should, but that every government does control speech. I think you should control speech to some degree. But the Western idea of freedom of speech has never truly existed. If you go back to the founding, if you spoke out against the Lord, if blasphemy was illegal, and you would be punished for that in colonial America. And today, if I were to start spouting racial epithets, that could get me in actual legal trouble. So there is a control of my speech today in a similar manner as there was back at the founding of America, and to some degrees, in some aspects, in a similar manner in fascist Italy. So control of speech has always been a thing. It always will be a thing, and it should be a thing to some degree. You don't want somebody making actual threats of, hey, this guy at this place with these things, go do this thing to him. Like, you can't say that, and most people would agree that you can't say that. That there should be consequences for making actual active threats against people. That idea, that concept that the fascists did take, the idea of controlling speech, is something that should be recognized as it can be done right. And that's part of what he's saying here. The other part is, I would sum it up as, when identity is strong, when your national identity is strong, your ethnic identity, whatever it is, you don't really need to enforce it, because it's already kind of unthinkable and untenable that people would actually do it. If you go back 100 years, people aren't going to be burning American flags. They're not going to be defacing, stomping on American flags. And yet today, you can see that on any given day in a place like New York City or Los Angeles, for example. And that's because we've liberalized so much on our speech laws. And this is, again, in a modern American context, but this is to his point, where back then it was unthinkable that you would do such a thing against the symbol of your own nation. So they didn't really do much. They didn't speak out against it so much because it was already unthinkable. It was already in the in the will of man that I'm not going to do that. And that's what I think he's talking about here. That's what I took from this, is that when your idea of a shared identity, a shared past, and a commonly desired future is so strong, you don't need to really enforce speech laws. You don't need to necessarily go around and make sure that people are saying the right thing about the state, because they will already not be doing that. Again, just a couple of pages later, though, on to the next point. So here in about pages 46 to 47, not too far after that last point, he's talking about the different types of cultures, the ethical state of fascism. He's talking about virtuism, moralism, and other different isms. But then I'm talking about this paragraph here where he kind of brings it back. He's like, I'm getting distracted. Here's what it is. So here's what it is. These thoughts are already leading away from the field of the present considerations. The important point in general is the idea of action through prestige, and then appeal to special forms of sensibility, vocation in the interests of individuals, an idea that ought to be part of a true state and its leaders. If the appeal finds no echo, little of what really matters can be attained in another way. A people and a nation will just float away or be reduced to a malleable mass in the hands of demagogues, knowledgeable in the art of acting on the pre-personal and most primitive strata of human beings. I mentioned a moment ago that it's kind of a callback to other points that he's made. He's talking about the soul of man, what makes a man, what makes patriots and nationalists those things, what makes an Italian an Italian, what makes a German, what makes the Chinese and Americans. If you don't hearken, maybe not constantly, but very frequently, to those ideas, to this idea of, at least in my view, of actual rugged American, to some degree individualism, but patriotism, to a love of your country, to an idea of liberty in the sense of that you're free to do what you ought, not to do what you want. If you don't hearken to the idea of duty to your country, to your fellow man, to your family, to your children, then eventually, gradually, these things are going to kind of dissipate. If you don't appeal to these things regularly, then you're going to lose them. If you don't use it, you lose it. And in this case, when you're talking about national identity, that's going to have grave consequences. He puts it pretty aptly that people are going to turn from nationalists, from patriots, from Italians, from Americans, from, again, whatever nationality, from whatever ethnicity. They're going to turn from those things into a malleable mass ripe for the picking for any other charismatic and persuasive demagogue, whether that is a fascist strongman or a vile communist. You're going to have a large mass of people that are now susceptible to a new idea of what makes up their polity, what makes up their people. And that is a grave danger for a nation. And one that should be recognized, even, yes, outside of the scope of fascist regimes of Europe, South America, and wherever else you may find them. There's also this idea of fascist regimes being one-party states, but in the actual original fascism, as he puts it, there is no party. The true state, it is hardly necessary to say this in Julius Evola's writings, does not admit the rule of parties, partitocratia, of democratic regimes. Parliamentary reform, we shall talk about in a little while, undoubtedly represented one of the positive aspects of fascism. However, the conception of a one-party state is absurd. Because it belongs exclusively to the world of parliamentary democracy, it is only irrationally that the idea of a party can be preserved in a regime opposed to everything that is democratic. Saying party, on the other hand, means saying part, and the concept of party implies that of a multiplicity through which the sole party would be the part that wants to become the whole. In other words, the faction that eliminates all others without, for all that, changing its nature and elevating itself to a higher level, precisely because it continues to consider itself as a party. The fascist regime of Italy and actual fascists would not consider themselves truly to be a fascist party. They are simply the state. They are simply the nation. There is no party in a fascist regime because they don't see parties. They reject the concept at its base. It would be like saying that there is no Republican or Democrat Party in America, that there is no Green Party or Libertarian Party, that these parties don't exist because we are all Americans. That's the similar, that's how I would relate it to American modernity, that the denial of party does not mean one party rule to them. It actually signals to them true national unity. Countrymen for countrymen. It's not left versus right. It's not red versus blue. It's simply, in the case of fascist Italy, Italians working for Italy. That's all it was to them, which is why they objectively and outrightly denied the idea of parties, the idea of democracy, the idea of parliamentary systems, of houses of lords and whatnot, the idea of a senate. They didn't really have that. Later on page 66, he has a lengthy paragraph. It is reminiscent of the word walls, the whole pages, multiple pages that are really just a single paragraph. That's kind of how older texts were written, I've found. But maybe newer philosophical texts, I don't know. Anyway, this one starts that these are the words of Mussolini. We are becoming more and more a military nation because we want it. Since we are not afraid of words, we shall add militaristic. To finish, a warrior nation that is endowed in an always higher degree with the virtues of obedience, sacrifice, and dedication. Back to Evola. Before this, he had already said in 1925, everyone should, again to Mussolini, everyone should consider himself a soldier when he is not wearing the gray-green uniform, a soldier even when he works at the office, at the factory, in the dockyards, or on the farm, a soldier linked to all the rest of the army. Now, this goes on, and he does talk at pretty decent length in this tiny book about his view on how civil service and public service should be conducted, how it should be viewed from the outside and conducted from within. Well worth the read. I think that he has a lot of good ideas for how we should consider public service. But in this section here, this little excerpt of the excerpt that I read, I summarize it here in my notes as him saying that daily duty should inspire every man, that both Evola and Mussolini are saying this, that a militaristic society doesn't necessarily mean that every man is a soldier. It means joy and purpose for your people, knowing that whenever you're working on your farm and you're plowing your fields, whenever you're bringing in that harvest, that wheat, that grain, whatever it is, if today it might be soy, who knows, but whatever it is that you're harvesting, that is not only going to your people, but that is going to your military. That these things that you do on a daily basis, whether it is in the factory making machines and automobiles, whether it's in the office keeping the docks running so you can have your shipping and all that, so you can keep the economy moving. It's not just for the military, it's not just for the country, it is for your people, that you are doing an objective good for your defined people, whether that's Italy, whether that's Italians, whatever the identity is. And if I'm saying whatever the identity is, anytime I've said whatever nationality, that's me injecting that. He's, of course, talking about fascist Italy. That is objectively what Julius Evola is talking about. But this idea that daily duty should be inspiring to every man, that you should have a joy in the purpose that you serve for everybody around you, that is, I think, an objective good. That it is very easy to be disillusioned and disenchanted with modernity in America, in the West. It's very easy to think of yourself as just a number because of corporatism, unfortunately, because of capitalism, because of a wide variety of things that we do here in the West today. We have largely lost the idea of what it is to be a Western man or a Western woman, what it means to be European, what it means to be American, what it means to be a people, an actual cohesive people with an actual identity, instead of just some multicultural blob that is a malleable mass ripe for the picking for other people. If we were still doing things right, many more people would see what they do as an objective good. People would be in manufacturing, people would be harvesting, people would be doing office work, and know that they're doing good for other people instead of serving some corporate bottom line. And that idea of joy and purpose is what I took from this. And it's one of the, again, many things, one of the many good qualities that I have found so far in fascism. Not that I think that you should be a fascist for comments that I see the comments I've made prior in this video, but that's what I think he's talking about here. Now, it's not all rosy. It's not that I love, obviously, everything that the fascists say. And here in this book, as much green and blue as you do see, I do have these two little purple tabs here of like, dude, haha, what the hell are you talking about? So here is a con to show, if nothing else, yeah, I do think that they're wrong on some parts. There is the well-known propaganda which has been organized in unprecedented proportions that, especially concerning Germany, presents everything that happened in the period before and during the war as a unique ensemble of evil ideas. Degraded policies and horrors with special attention given to the German Gestapo and the Italian OVRA, the Organization for Vigilance and the Repression of Anti-Fascism. The concentration camps and so on, with all the exaggerations, illegitimate generalizations, and sometimes downright inventions that are useful for that purpose. We have no intention of asserting that everything was in order then, and various things deserve to be severely condemned and deprecated. I'm sure that he did this elsewhere. Maybe not, I'm sure. Maybe he did this elsewhere. But in this passage, in this excerpt, it seems that he is actively not recognizing the atrocities of the German camps, or at least that he would downplay what happened in the concentration camps, in other fascist regimes like in Romania, like the Ustashi. Like, it seems like he would downplay the repugnant violence that was committed by fascist regimes. And perhaps unsurprising, he is a fascist, and if my people were doing something atrocious, I would probably not want to admit that my own people were capable and that they carried out such atrocities. I would probably not want to be like, yeah, we were kind of bad. So on the one hand, I understand the natural impulse. And of all these points where it's like, yep, I think you got some good points here. And having the cursory knowledge that I have of a guy like Hirschfeld in Germany, I'd probably want to go to war with people too. But then whenever you start bashing babies in rail cars, I think you lost your points. But again, this is not like an overt, outright, and thorough affirmation of fascism. Like I said in the beginning, I'm simply curious to understand what fascism actually was. And in order to do that, I'm doing my best to go to primary sources. And I think you should too. I think we should understand the things that we're talking about, because these ideas that popped up in the 19th and 20th centuries, and certainly ideas throughout all of history, people are killing people today over these same ideas that have existed for tens, hundreds, or thousands of years. These various beliefs, people are still killing each other over them today. And a lot of it, so much of what I found, so much conflict and strife is simply due to misunderstandings or miscommunications, which is why I'm doing my own research into what fascism is. And I certainly am going to go into other ideologies and ideas too. So if you like what you like so far, if you've liked what you've seen so far, rather, do the algorithm things. But if you want to support me otherwise, I do have links down below. I write books, so it's not just to give me money. Let me continue to give you stuff. I write language books, educational books, and I'm working on my first novel too. So follow for more, as always. If there's an idea or a book or something that you think that I should look into, let me know down below. I'm always looking for good or bad ideas to read. I'm looking for ideas. But thank you, especially if you've made it this far, and I hope I will see you in the next one.